Thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to be doing these combos from the couch. It's just going to be a quick little conversation. We're excited today to be joined by Adam, who's going to share a bit about his book, Reframe the Day. I know for me, I'm excited to hear a bit about how to reframe what we're going through. I know that we're all kind of experiencing a completely new reality, and something about that community makes me feel a little bit better, so it's fun to see so many people joining us today and hopefully get to hear about how we can reframe what's going on in our own lives. So with that, I'll pass it over to Adam.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Silent Senator Donovan, as well for having me on. I'm really excited to do this. We've also got, for those of you who are on the browser or dialing in from the phone, we've also got Instagram Live going right now. Hello, Instagram Live. Thank you for your patience with only being able to hear me and nobody else on the call. Ideal for me, not great for everybody, but let's get right into it. So I'm going to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes or so sharing 4 different ways of thinking that have helped me process and deal with the last couple of months. And I think it's important to say right off the bat that these ideas aren't going to solve anything for anybody, but the hope is that they might help you think a little bit differently. So before I get into that, let me give a little bit of context about why I'm here and where some of these ideas are coming from. And then from there, we'll move into the 4 practices to reframe how anyone responds to this crazy moment that we are all living through. So a little bit of background. Before moving to the UK with my partner, Aaron, a couple of years ago, I spent close to 8 years working in politics in DC and in Denver. And as many of the people know, the world of politics is characterized, at least the way I would describe it, by 3 things. One is constant striving. You are constantly striving for the next promotion, the next job, the next election, the next accomplishment, something next. There are constant distractions coming at you from incoming news alerts and tweets and cable pundits, policy ideas, interest groups. And then it's a world of constant uncertainty. You never really know when the next scandal or national disaster or unexpected election result or when the next global pandemic will sweep through and completely upend not just the trajectory of your state or your community of your country, but also for those who work in politics, your career. So that's this world of politics. It's constant striving for future achievements with constant distractions coming at you and a world of constant uncertainty. But while that was my experience working in politics, that experience is very much not limited to politics, because for many of us, no matter what we do, where we work, where we live, that's just life. We are striving for what's next in a distracted and uncertain world. We are compelled to try to do more, spending more time to be more productive and more busy and achieve more things in the hope that someday maybe we can do it all. After moving to the UK, I started to experience a little bit of a different world from this. There were these moments of fulfillment and contentment and presence and just brief moments in time when I was able to put these compulsions to be striving and working all the time and trying to do more to the side. And so, as I often do, I started writing about them to try to figure out where these moments were coming from. And I kept writing, and that eventually became the book, Reframe the Day, which comes out in a couple of weeks. So at the core of this book, there are 10 practices and 1 idea. The 1 idea is that anyone, no matter who you are, you can nudge today in a more fulfilling direction. And the 10 practices that I outline in the book are the tools for doing so. And it's worth noting that I wouldn't call these practices quick fixes or overnight solutions or really solutions at all, for that matter. These are not practices that require radical changes. They are just tweaks at the margins of your days that anyone, anywhere can make, no matter who you are or what you do. What unites these 10 practices, and what to me at least makes them different from the typical self-help ideas like live in the moment and find your passion and just do X, Y, and Z and you'll be happy forever. What makes them different is that these 10 practices focus on 2 things that we, as individuals, always control. The first is how we see our days, how we interpret and respond to the world around us, which is basically our perspective. And the second thing we always have at least a little control over is how we spend our days. We all have obligations and commitments and burdens and responsibilities that we don't control, but there are always some actions that we do. Now, nobody can build a perfect life overnight, or at all for that matter, but we can try to build a slightly more fulfilling day today, and then hopefully tomorrow, and then hopefully the day after that. And what Reframe the Day is about is doing just that. It's retaking control, just a little bit, of how we see our days and how we spend our days, and focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't. So how do we take that approach toward the current moment? I'm going to walk through 4 ways that I have found helpful to reframe my response to this coronavirus crisis. And one last caveat before we do, not all of this is going to be relevant to everyone, not just on this call, but everyone in general, because everybody's situation is different. Some of us are working from home, some of us are furloughed, some of us have lost our jobs, some of us are working tirelessly and exhaustingly in essential services like healthcare and food service. And whatever your situation, the goal with these ideas is not do these 4 things and all your problems will be solved. These ideas are tools for self-reflection. They are very much not prescriptions. With that, let's get into the first way to reframe your response to this crisis, which is create moments of stillness, which sounds kind of silly when you think about it, but think for a second about just how little time you actually spend thinking, which is not thinking with a podcast playing in the background, or while you're watching TV, or while you're on a conference call, or while you're mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, or while you're doing all of those things at the same time. But think, how much time do you actually spend thinking without stimuli or distractions, and especially the digital kind, coming your way? How much time do you spend letting your mind wander, chewing on a specific problem or challenge, exploring a complicated or confusing or puzzling emotion, or just being bored? If you're anything like me, at least, the answer is never. From the second that I wake up to the second I go to bed, and sometimes beyond that point, I am taking on incoming information. That's news articles and emails and TV shows and podcasts, and I'm running from one virtual commitment to the next and always wondering, will I get everything done? Will I fit everything in? Well, what do I have to do next, and what do I have to do after that? And if you, like me, are spending every second reviewing new information, then you don't have a second to process or digest what's coming your way. And if you, like me, are spending every second thinking about what's next, then you don't have a second to think about what you're doing right now. And it would be awesome if life would give us some breaks from time to time, or some automatic breathers where we could take some time to process, but it rarely does. And I think that's even more true over the last month and into the foreseeable future, because if you're locked inside all day, all of those moments when you might have been able to do some mental processing, when you're stuck in traffic or on the subway or in line at the grocery store or walking to the gym, you're at the playground with your kids, all of those moments have evaporated, and essentially overnight. And they've done so just when we need them the most, which is in the middle of this traumatic, uncertain, and unsettling global crisis. More than ever, we need time to think, we need time to process, to turn our brains off for a bit, to make a little bit of sense out of the crazy world around us, and to try to put this stuff in perspective. So you have 2 options. You can wait for these moments to appear on their own, which they won't, or you can take control and try to carve out a little bit of time for them. In other words, schedule them. It sounds very silly to put time for stillness or time for thinking on your calendar, but something the writer Daniel Pink has said is what gets scheduled gets done. So let me give an example that I came across a couple years ago in a New York Times column. It was about George Shultz, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State for 6 years. And every week, he told this columnist, he scheduled what was called a Shultz hour. And for that 1 hour a week, he locked himself in his office and he told his staff not to interrupt him unless his wife or his boss called, which would be the big B boss, President of the United States. So if anyone else called, he was not to be disturbed. And he said this 1 hour a week was the only way he could make sure he had time to focus on larger questions instead of being pulled constantly into what he called moment-to-moment tactical issues. And, none of us, as far as I know, are the U.S. Secretary of State, but we get pulled into these moment-to-moment tactical issues all the time, constantly, and these don't leave us any time to think, to process the larger questions, to flip our minds to off for a bit, or just to be still. So, first way to reframe your response to this moment is schedule your Schultz hour. Put it on your calendar or on your to-do list. Wake up a little earlier if you have to. Go for a walk without your phone. Sit down with a blank notepad or a blank smartphone note open in front of you with the phone on airplane mode. Find a way to create these moments of stillness that you did not know you were missing. And that brings us to the second way to reframe your response to this crisis, which is consume your news a little bit more intentionally. And I'm guessing this is true for a lot of other folks, I cannot stop consuming news about COVID-19. All of the political news I used to inhale is now politics and the coronavirus era news. All of the political shows I used to listen to are now coronavirus shows. All of the breaking news alerts I used to get are now coronavirus news alerts. And then on top of that, I go poking around the internet for even more pandemic-related news all the time. And there's even a name for it. It's doom scrolling. And all of this doom scrolling is understandable because, like I said, and like we all know, we've heard 1,000 times a day for the last month, we're living through a traumatic and uncertain moment, one of the most traumatic and uncertain moments in human history. But the fact that we can't get enough of this news, that we can't stop this doom scrolling, is precisely why we would probably benefit from putting some guardrails around it. Because when we open up 17 browser tabs and spend 3 hours reading terrifying news stories about the rapid spread of this pandemic, what are we doing? I would say we're looking for answers, for solutions, for explanations, for some sort of reassurance that everything will be okay, that things will go back to normal. But that may or may not be true. It's definitely not something we're going to find in the depths of the internet. We're only going to find anxiety and exhaustion. I think when we read the news compulsively, at least when I do, I'm looking for a sense of control. But the algorithms that control the news that comes our way, those are the ones in control, not us. So how do you reframe your news intake? You don't need to stop consuming it because that's not realistic, and it's also probably a little bit irresponsible. You can just do a little bit less. You can put some structure around the what and the when of how you read, watch, and listen to the news. I would say the what is just a little bit less of the stressful second-by-second updates about the spread of COVID-19 and a little bit more of the content and activities that you get value and meaning from. Might be a good documentary, a novel, go for a run, work on a jigsaw puzzle, work on a crossword puzzle, spend a few minutes writing in a journal, call a friend, and that's it. A little bit more of that and a little bit less of the news. And that's the what. The when, I would say, of tweaking your news consumption is even simpler. It's just a little bit less often and with a little bit more structure. So could you turn off news alerts and notifications so you're reading the news when you want to and not when your phone tells you to? Could you avoid Twitter or Instagram until the afternoon or the weekend, or could you do that forever? Could you check one news source in the morning and then just leave it at that for the rest of the day? It obviously doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be. And no matter how strong your system is, no matter how sturdy your news guardrails are, you're going to go careening over them from time to time. But the key point here, we need far less of this news than we think. And I think that's always true, but it's especially true in the middle of a global pandemic. So idea number 2, consume news more intentionally. Moving on to number 3, the news is not the only thing we would benefit from a little bit less of. You know what we would also benefit from less of is beating ourselves up for not being productive all the time. And that is the third way to reframe your response to waking up in contagion. It is resisting this obsession we all have to be productive and busy all the time. So what do I mean by this? Basically, you can read more in the book. Modern work, or really modern life in general, has taught us that being productive is what makes us valuable. It makes us worthwhile. And that's not true just as employees, but as individuals, as people, and as human beings. When we feel productive, we feel accomplished and content and like our time has been spent in a meaningful way. When we feel unproductive, we feel unworthy, like we failed. And that was all true before this crisis. And now, of course, for any number of reasons, it might be to distract ourselves from fear and uncertainty, to give us a comforting sense of normalcy. Maybe we don't know what else to do, or because we genuinely have a lot more to do right now. these days we feel even more compelled to be hyper-productive and to be working all the time. And to be clear, some people don't have a choice. If you're taking care of a family member full-time or trying to keep the kids entertained all day or working 20-hour days at the hospital or on the ranch, making it through today is not a question of productivity. This is service. This is survival. But for a lot of us, we are, I think, obsessed with being productive and staying busy all the time because we don't know what else to do. There's a BuzzFeed News journalist, Anne Helen Peterson, who has written some amazing work about burnout, and she wrote a viral piece about millennial burnout just over a year ago, and she had this great line in this piece, which was basically saying, why am I burned out? It's because I've internalized the idea that I should be working all the time. And why have I internalized that idea? Because everything and everyone in my life has reinforced it explicitly and implicitly since I was young. And she's talking about millennials in that particular line, but I think this pretty much applies to just about everyone in some form or another. And the only thing down this path is exhaustion and stress and anxiety and burnout. And I think, especially right now, we all have enough of that. So how can you reassert some control over your compulsion to be working and producing and achieving all the time? One way that's worked for me is thinking about this concept called Parkinsons Law. And Parkinsons Law says that work expands to fill the time allotted for it. So let's say that until a month ago, which feels like a year ago, your hours at work were normally 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you used to commute an hour to and from work each day, then you'd leave the house at 8 and get home at 6, but you were only working from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. All of a sudden, in mid-March, the distinguished governor says you're in lockdown and your boss says you're working from home. All else equal, you've now got 2 extra hours from 8 to 9 in the morning and from 5 to 6 in the afternoon. These are hours that you used to spend in your car. If you instead decide to open your computer and start working at 8 and keep that computer open until 6 p.m., one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to find that your existing work magically expands to fill those 2 extra hours, or you're going to say yes to a lot of new stuff and take on 2 extra hours of work. And I would say there's another option, which is leverage Parkinson's Law and work smarter, work less. If work expands to fill the time you set aside for it, it can also shrink to fill the time you set aside for it. So how can you do this? Start by not saying yes to every call, every virtual meeting, or every other request that comes your way. You can start saying no to things so your commitments, which only used to take 8 hours, don't suddenly take 10 hours. As best you can, this is within reason for everybody, start and end your day on a fixed schedule so your work doesn't slowly inflate to take up even more of your day. And keep in mind what Parkinson's Law says, which is that work expands to fill the time you give it. So give it less time. We do not have to spend the entire coronavirus crisis working ourselves to the point of exhaustion and burnout. If you're not productive all the time, and I'm probably talking to myself here as much as to anyone else, if you're not productive all the time, cut yourself some slack. If you're having a hard time working right now, give yourself a break and take a break, which brings us to the fourth and final idea that I want to share here, which is probably the most important way that I've found to reframe one's response to this insane moment that we're living through, which is feel whatever it is you need to feel right now. And another way to put this is surrender control. This is different from actual surrender because this is not giving up. In this case, surrender control just means recognizing that we're living through a crazy, uncertain, exhausting time right now, and accepting that every single aspect of this crisis is 100% outside of our control. This chapter that we're all living through is prompting all sorts of feelings for all of us. There's fear for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our community. There's sadness about canceled plans, weddings, graduations, routines, and there's obviously an enormous amount of pain and loss and grief and anxiety. And none of these feelings is pleasant, but they are all real. And no matter how hard we try, we can't force ourselves not to feel them. The only thing that is in our control is how we respond to them. And how should you respond? I mean, what I would say is, and it sounds really simple, but just feel them. You can feel them with awareness of whatever it is you're feeling, and you can feel your feelings with forgiveness for whatever it is you're feeling. You can create a moment of stillness for yourself and let your emotions bubble to the surface. You can maybe take a break from inhaling Twitter updates and do some journaling about what you're feeling. You can explore an awareness practice like mindfulness meditation that can help you realize just how little control human beings have over the thoughts and emotions that bombard us pretty much every minute of every day. You can take some time and reflect on mortality, because if nothing else, this global pandemic is reminding us that we will not live forever, and our number will almost certainly be called at a time when we're not ready for it. And some might say that's a depressing and morbid thought, but I would say it's actually the opposite. There's a great line from the book When Breath Becomes Air by the late Paul Kalanithi, who says, "Even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I'm still living." And the fact that we're feeling all of these fears and anxieties right now, that means that today, right now at least, as the sun sets here in London, or as the Coloradans on the call are wrapping up your virtual lunch break, we're feeling all these things. That means we are still living, and that means we still have a say in how we see this moment and in what we do with it. So let me move towards wrapping up there. As I said at the start, I clearly don't have any solutions. As my partner Aaron will say, I'm having mini meltdowns in my own internal crises pretty much on a daily basis, sometimes more frequently than that. I had a super low point, feeling totally defeated just a couple days ago. I'm sure another one of those will come back around. But what I'm trying to do is just feel those and to reframe each day by focusing on what I can control, because that's, at the end of the day, that's pretty much all anybody can do. We can't control this crisis, we can't control this virus, but we can control how we respond to it. We can't control other people, but we could control how we treat them and whether we show up for them. We can't control our feelings, but we can control where we are with them and whether we allow ourselves to feel them, or whether we attempt to deny these feelings or bury them or punish ourselves for experiencing them. So to reframe your response to this crisis, create a moment of stillness. Try consuming the news a little bit more intentionally. You can try resisting the obsession with being productive and busy all the time. You can surrender control. And perhaps most importantly, you can buy my book, which is on sale in a couple of weeks. And that last one is a joke. But let me wrap there and then move to some Q&A. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Instagram. Instagram, I will say or repeat the questions that come through on the conference call.
Well, is by chance my audio working now?
Loud and clear.
Whoa, that's so exciting. Well, I'm glad we got that to work. I have had a chance to read this book, and I would encourage people to grab it, particularly those who have been in politics. There's a really nice nexus because Adam has been in politics, and I just found it really refreshing of someone who has come from that part of our world to talk about having to step away from it, because being in public service, being in that, there's an expectation of constant consumption of news, constant being available. And it just seems to be as simple as just giving your permission to step away. So, Adam, thank you for this. And maybe, Marley, you can throw some questions your way. If anyone who's on this has a question, click that little comment bubble and type it away, and we'll try to get some of your questions answered. Marley, what do we got?
Yeah, so I've got a couple here. Is there a time of day that's better to reframe and to go through these 4 steps of mindfulness than another day, than another time of the day?
Let me repeat that for Instagram. Insta question was, is there a certain time of day that it's better to try to reframe or think through some of these ideas? No. I think the idea is that really whenever works for you. I think that one of the underlying principles of this book, or one of the ideas that underpins it, is that there is no right or wrong way to go about any of this. It's really whatever works for you, and the idea is just to be aware of it and to start having these thoughts and start reflecting a little bit more on, what your days are, what you're experiencing, what you're feeling. And the more aware you are of it, the more you can try to not control it entirely, but nudge it more in the direction you want to be experiencing. For me, the morning is that time. That's in the book I use the analogy of thinking of my brain sort of like a computer. And when you boot up a computer first thing in the morning, it's fresh, you don't have any other programs running, whatever weird sites you were on the day before haven't, whatever they downloaded that had running in the background has stopped running. You open up the first program that you want to use and it's crisp and the fan hasn't started overheating, and basically for me that's the equivalent of peace of mind. So I think of the brain as sort of like a computer, and first thing in the morning it's fresh and ready to go. So that's when I try to write and meditate and read. And then what I'm not doing then is I'm not going on social media. I'm not reading the news. I'm really not even looking at my phone except to open up the meditation app. And then if I can do that for a couple hours in the morning, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, I've at least had that time to reset and get my feet on solid ground in the morning and then go from there. And I think it's important to note that this isn't doable for everybody. For those who are involved in politics to some degree or another, you might not be able to wait until 1 in the afternoon to read the news. That's probably not going to work. You're not going to be doing your job well. So you have to figure out what works for you. And I have a few advantages in that sense, and that I've left the world of politics for now. But short answer, whenever works for you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything to be said for routine and the way that having a consistent routine day to day might play into how we reframe the day as well?
That works for you.
Yeah, I think so. And question for Instagram, does routine play a role in this? And my partner Aaron will tell you that I love a good routine, and that runs in the family as well. We love a good routine. I think one thing I talk about in the book, and I'm definitely not the first person to write about this, is this idea of decision fatigue. And there's some question, I think, as to whether this is an actual concept that is supported by psychological and academic evidence, or if it's more just a way of thinking about when we get tired of making decisions at the end of the day. But for me, the more routines I have for the things I don't need to think about, the more energy and mental space I can commit to the things that do require time and attention and thought and effort. There's a famous line that Chad and I used to, that we shared back in, I think it was a 2012 profile of Barack Obama, about how he said he only had gray and blue suits in his closet because he had too many other decisions to make during the day, that he didn't have time or the mental capacity to be using even a sliver of brain space to decide what he was going to wear that day, except for that one day when he wore the tan suit, and that was a major scandal. So thinking about that idea of just using routines to limit the decisions that you have to make can free up a little bit more space to worry about the things and the people who matter more to you.
You can't hear me. Super. I'm going to ask just one more question, then we'll go ahead and finish up here. What's been the biggest surprise about how COVID has impacted your attempts to reframe the day?
That question for Instagram is, what's been the biggest surprise about how the COVID crisis has impacted my ability to reframe the day? I could go on about this for a while. I think the degree of mood swings that I have experienced over the last couple of weeks are pretty, it's kind of a ride that I have not been on in a long time. And I have pretty much everything going for me right now, which is that I have my best friend and partner living here with me. I work from home. I worked from home before this, so I was already set up. I'm launching a book, which is a lot of fun, and I love doing this. And, I haven't been furloughed, so pretty much everything that could be going right for me right now is going right. And even so, the volatility of the ups and downs, and especially the downs over the last couple of weeks, it's been pretty surprising. And it has been a chance, I think, to practice some of the stuff that I write about in the book, and to remind myself that, there's no right or wrong way to do any of this. There's no finish line. There's no point when, I've suddenly achieved awareness, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. There's no point when I have made myself immune to my compulsion to be productive and busy all the time. And it's just a practice of kind of like meditation itself. You come back to the breath when you get lost, and then you get lost again, and that is a meditative practice, and it's called a practice for a reason. All of these things that I talk about in the book, I refer to them as practices for a reason, because you never get them exactly right, and the best we can do is just try to be working just a little bit closer towards where we want to be day in and day out, and then cutting ourselves some slack when we fall short. And that's probably where I need to spend the most time practicing.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today, particularly all the way from London. I don't know if we ever really illuminated that part of this, but this is our first cross-ocean convo from the couch. So we're making it
transatlantic convos.
But I really do appreciate your advice, and appreciate finding your time and your day to share an hour with us talking about how to reframe. I found something just as simple as turning my phone off, so I can it's still like engaging in there, but it's not ordering me around to respond to its notifications and phone calls. Just these little things, because we are dealing with so much unprecedented stress and news right now that we just have to give ourselves permission to take deep breaths as tragedy seems to be everywhere around us. So,
totally. And it sounds selfish, but really, if we're not doing this stuff for ourselves, then we're definitely not going to be able to be there for the people around us too. So I think that's important to remember too. This is not just for us. This is for the people we care about too.
Well, I will do the shameful plug, because I know you too well that I know you won't do it for yourself. So this is
I've gotten better at shameful plugging. But yes, go for it.
Wonderful read. Either ask your local independent bookstore to grab it for you when it becomes available. It is available for pre-order on Amazon. So if you found this conversation helpful today, nothing better than supporting a new author getting out there on the scene. So thank you for everyone who joined us today. We'll do another one of these next week. Topic to be determined. We're waiting to see who's available. But thank you, Adam, for joining us, and thank you, everyone else, for having a little time for a convo on the couch, which in itself certainly helped me reframe the day. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you.